Park Se-roy was originally a mischievous student, often punished by his teacher by having to hold a bucket of water over his head. But deep down, he was a kind-hearted person. Unlike Roy, there was Ji-won, a ruthless bully who frequently tormented his classmates. Being the son of a wealthy and powerful businessman, no one dared to stand up to him. One day, Roy witnessed an unfair scene and immediately stepped forward to intervene. His friend, Soo-ah, quickly warned him, "Don't mess with this guy. If you offend him, your whole family could suffer." However, Roy didn't listen and still confronted Ji-won, even lecturing him in front of their shocked classmates. Embarrassed, Ji-won lashed out, escalating his cruelty. To assert his dominance, he challenged Roy to a fight. Just as they were about to clash, the teacher walked in. But Ji-won ignored the teacher's presence and continued to torment his classmates. Fearing the power of Ji-won's family, the teacher turned a blind eye. Seeing this, Ji-won became even more arrogant and provoked Roy further. Unable to hold back his anger, Roy finally lost control and punched him. Little did he know that single action would put his entire family in jeopardy. Roy's father worked for Ji-won's father's company, and the incident quickly reached the higher-ups. As a result, Roy's father was immediately summoned by the management. Meanwhile, Roy was harshly punished, beaten with a stick by the vice principal while Ji-won watched smugly. The principal even bowed and apologized to Ji-won. At that moment, Ji-won's father arrived with Roy's father. He appeared to be a reasonable man and acknowledged Roy's father's years of service. Because of this, he didn't want to expel Roy from school or send him to prison. Grateful, Roy's father thought the matter was settled. However, Ji-won's father made one demand. Roy had to kneel and apologize to his son. But Roy, being strong-willed and proud, refused. "My father taught me never to lower my dignity," he said firmly. Enraged by Roy's defiance, Ji-won's father became furious. Unexpectedly, Roy's father was proud of his son's integrity and expressed his admiration. This only angered Ji-won further. Seeing an opportunity for revenge, he whispered something to his father, who, now even angrier, fired Roy's father on the spot. Roy was devastated, realizing the consequences of his actions. He clenched his fists in frustration, but was powerless to change anything. That evening, he and his father went to a small restaurant to drink and talk. His father reassured him, saying he was proud of the man Roy was becoming. "As long as we live with integrity, we have nothing to regret," he said. They drank together, completely unaware that their real nightmare had just begun. The next day, Roy found out he had been expelled from school, and his father was left unemployed. With no other options, his father used his savings to open a small restaurant. Soo-ah often visited to eat and spend time with them. However, a major event soon shook their lives. Ji-won also had feelings for Soo-ah, but she was only interested in Roy. This rejection enraged Ji-won, fueling his resentment toward Roy's family. One night, Roy's father was out making a food delivery on his motorcycle when Ji-won, driving recklessly, deliberately rammed into him from behind, sending him tumbling down a hill. Roy's father died instantly. Losing his beloved father shattered Roy. The man he admired most was gone. As he grieved, the police arrived with shocking news. The perpetrator's family wanted to settle the matter privately. Roy was furious at how casually they treated his father's death. Then, Soo-ah noticed something suspicious. While picking up a pile of documents, she spotted a photograph of Ji-won with a car. She recognized the license plate. It matched the one involved in the hit and run. It became clear that Ji-won's family had bribed the police to cover up the crime by making someone else take the blame. Blinded by rage, Roy stormed off in search of Ji-won. That night, under heavy rain, he found him in the hospital garden. Ji-won was startled and fell to the ground, terrified. Roy, consumed by grief and hatred, unleashed his fury, mercilessly beating Ji-won until he was barely conscious. At that moment, Roy grabbed a large rock, fully intending to end Ji-won's life. Just as he was about to strike, Soo-ah arrived with the police. They aimed their guns at Roy and ordered him to drop the rock or they would shoot. Roy, still seething, refused to back down. Seeing this, an officer cocked his gun, ready to fire. In the critical moment, Soo-ah stepped between them and pleaded with Roy to stop. "Your father wouldn't want this," she said. Her words struck a chord. Thinking about his father's values, Roy slowly regained his senses. With trembling hands, he dropped the rock. The police lowered their guns, but Roy was left in agony, crying out in frustration. He had lost everything, and yet he couldn't even take revenge. After that incident, Roy was sent to prison. The chairman came to visit him and said he would forgive everything if Roy knelt down and apologized. Hearing this, Roy was furious and immediately shot back, saying, "The one who should be kneeling is your son." Enraged by his defiance, the chairman threatened Roy. "Let's see how much suffering I can put you through," he said with a cold smile. Through his lawyer, the chairman found out that Sua was Roy's close friend. Wasting no time, he called Sua to his house. Knowing that she didn't have enough money for school, he tried to bribe her into testifying in favor of his son. Sua, however, asked bluntly, "How much are you willing to pay?" The chairman found her attitude amusing and laughed. Later, Ji-Yoon-won appeared. He was filled with regret and wanted to turn himself in. But his father refused to let him. "You are the heir of my empire. You will not have a criminal record," the chairman declared. Left with no choice, Ji-Yoon-won had to obey. To toughen him up even further, the chairman took him to a farm. There, he grabbed a chicken and ordered Ji-Yoon-won to kill it, forcing him to become even more ruthless. Ji-Yoon-won hesitated, but in the end, he complied for the sake of his massive inheritance. Watching his son submit, the chairman laughed wickedly. The next day, Roy's trial took place. The court sentenced him to 3 years in prison for manslaughter. But the truth was far more sinister. The chairman had killed the person who initially confessed to the crime and then framed Roy instead. A police officer knew about the setup, but was powerless to do anything, as the police chief had been bribed and ordered to stay silent. On his first day in prison, senior inmates forced Roy to kneel. Instead of complying, he burst out laughing, leaving them confused. It turned out that the chairman had arranged for these prisoners to beat Roy mercilessly. A few days later, Sua visited him. Seeing his bruised face, she was overcome with guilt. She confessed everything, admitting that she had betrayed him in exchange for money to continue her studies. But Roy didn't blame her at all. Before saying goodbye, he looked at her and confessed, "I really like you. When I get out, I'll find you." Sua, deeply moved, hoped that Roy would one day become wealthy and at least be strong enough to take revenge on the chairman. They parted ways with a promise. From that day forward, Roy never forgot his grudge against the Jang family. 3 years passed quickly, and the day finally came for Roy to be released from prison. During his time inside, he befriended a notorious gangster, someone who was deeply impressed by Roy's resilience. The first thing Roy did after getting out was visit the bar where he and his father used to go. Standing in silence, he made a vow. "I will get revenge, no matter what it takes." Determined, Roy started gathering information on the Jang Corporation, including everything about Ji-Yoon-won. He also followed the address from one of Sua's letters, which led him to a bustling street called Itaewon. That day, the street was hosting a lively festival, with crowds filling the area. Just as Roy was looking around in confusion, Sua suddenly appeared and ran straight into his arms. Shocked but overjoyed, Roy couldn't believe his eyes. She took him out for a drink, and as they talked, she revealed that she was now working for Ji-Yoon-won's family business. However, Roy didn't hold it against her. Instead, he told her about his plan to work on a cargo ship for 7 years. Knowing they would be separated for so long, Sua felt a pang of sadness. The next day, Roy set off on his journey, working tirelessly on the ocean liner. Time flew by, and 7 years passed like a breeze. During this time, Sua climbed the ranks at Jang Corporation, becoming highly successful and well-respected by the chairman. But despite Ji-Yoon-won's persistent attempts to win her over, she never gave in, because deep down, her heart still belonged to Roy. One evening, after finishing work, she left the company and headed straight to Itaewon Street, the place where she and Roy had once made a promise. And just as she had hoped, Roy was there, waiting for her. Her eyes sparkled with emotion as she looked at him. After 7 long years, she hadn't expected Roy's casual remark about opening a restaurant to actually come true. But standing before her was proof. Roy had opened his own restaurant, Danbum. That day was its grand opening, and excitement filled the air. However, as the hours passed, reality set in. Despite all the effort, not a single customer had walked in. On top of that, the rent in Itaewon was extremely expensive. Right next to Itaewon High School, a group of girls were bullying others, but they ran into Yiseo, a tough girl. She pulled out her phone and went live, making the post go viral, turning her into an overnight celebrity. But this attracted the wrath of the other girl's parents, who came to confront Yiseo. Just as one of the mothers tried to strike her, Roy unexpectedly intervened. Yiseo took the chance to slap the mother back. Roy, confused, chased after Yiseo, demanding an apology. Yiseo lied, claiming her father died because of the woman, but then teased Roy, calling him an idiot for believing her. Yiseo, much like Roy, had a stubborn nature that often irritated the principal, but nothing could be done about it. Meanwhile, at Jenga Corporation, Ji-eun-won was presenting a plan to open a bar on Itaewon Street. Soo-ah objected, and the chairman agreed with her, tearing up Ji-eun-won's proposal and slapping him. The chairman was upset with the store's ongoing losses and handed over all Itaewon stores to Soo-ah to manage. Ji-eun-won, furious, threatened Soo-ah, but she boldly fired back, warning him about the chairman's other son, who was Yiseo's friend. Later, Ji-eun-won and Yiseo were riding a motorbike in Itaewon. Trying to avoid pedestrians, Yiseo flew off the bike, and Roy, who was handing out flyers nearby, rushed to help her. But when he saw her face, he remembered her defiant attitude. As Roy went to speak to Yiseo, he suddenly fainted from exhaustion. Yiseo and her friend rushed him to the hospital. At the same time, the chairman, aware that Roy opened a restaurant in Itaewon, ordered Soo-ah to sabotage him. Soo-ah, conflicted by her feelings for Roy, was tempted by the promise of money. In the hospital, after Roy woke up, Yiseo criticized his outdated flyer marketing and suggested promoting on social media instead. Roy took her advice, and they parted ways. Later that evening, Yiseo and her friend went to Jenga's restaurant, where they were asked to leave because they were underage. They then decided to visit Roy's restaurant, Danbum, where they found it empty. Yiseo immediately noticed the shabby decor. Roy, meanwhile, went out to observe other restaurants for ways to attract customers. He ran into Soo-ah, who asked about his struggles with attracting business. After their conversation, Soo-ah realized that Yiseo and her friend were underage and called the police. Inside, Yiseo's friend disrespected the staff, and Roy stepped in to defend them. The young man, drunk, became aggressive and grabbed Roy by the collar. Just as he was about to strike Roy, an employee rushed out to intervene, knocking the guy unconscious. The employee, a former thug, then poured a hot pot of food on the young man's feet. Moments later, the police arrived and arrested everyone, citing the underage patrons. As a result, Danbum was ordered to close for 2 months, enraging Seung-kwan, who caused a scene. At that moment, Ji-eun-won appeared, laughing maniacally as he saw Roy's downfall. Roy was furious, but when the police saw Ji-eun-won, they quickly ignored the situation, knowing he was the president's son. Roy, confused, confronted them, demanding to know why they were letting him go just because of his family's wealth. He couldn't understand why the police were so afraid of a tycoon's son. As Roy stood up to leave, Yiseo chased after him, telling him that closing the restaurant for 2 months could bankrupt him. She criticized Roy for being too stubborn and not knowing how to compromise. Roy, in turn, called her someone who only liked to destroy things. They argued until Ji-eun-won stepped forward, purposely bringing up how he had harmed Roy's father in the past, trying to provoke him. Despite the temptation, Roy remained patient, but Ji-eun-won's arrogance pushed him too far. Roy declared he would expose the truth about Ji-eun-won's role in his father's death and make him pay for his sins. This scared Ji-eun-won, and Yiseo, who was nearby, began to take an interest in Roy's quest for revenge. Yiseo and Ji-eun-soo were punished for their actions and had to write 100 reports, but instead of writing, Yiseo drew a picture of Roy. She admired his determination. Later, she researched the case online and passed by Roy's restaurant every day, even though it was still closed. A week later, during the New Year's celebrations, Yiseo went to a bar with friends. Despite drinking, she couldn't stop thinking about Roy, the person who had helped her when she needed it most. Meanwhile, Roy met Soo-ah at a familiar shop, unaware that she was the one who had reported him to the police, causing his restaurant to be shut down for 2 months. Almost confessing his feelings for her, Roy didn't realize the tension between them. After drinking, Yiseo wanted to head home, but was confronted by a man who had been bothering her earlier. When he tried to attack her, Yiseo defended herself, throwing money at him to get him to leave. Furious, he punched her, and as he continued his assault, Yiseo ran into an alley and into the men's restroom. There, she bumped into Roy again, who was initially shy but quickly sprang into action when he saw her injuries. Roy helped Yiseo, beating the man, and the two of them ran into Soo-ah, who had just arrived. They all ran together, and Yiseo had never felt so much fun running away with Roy. Seeing how much Roy cared for Yiseo made Soo-ah jealous. The two girls parted ways to go home, but Yiseo stopped, wanting to thank Roy for his help by taking him out for a drink. She also promised to promote his restaurant on Instagram. While Roy went to get water, Yiseo and Sua had a tense conversation. Sua arrogantly claimed that Roy liked her, but Yiseo revealed she liked Roy too. They argued, with the atmosphere growing more heated. Sua blamed Yiseo for Roy's restaurant closing, but Yiseo cleverly asked if Sua had reported him to the police. Sua hesitated, guilty, and Yiseo then called her out for betraying Roy. Sua admitted what she had done and challenged Yiseo, claiming Roy would still like her. When Roy returned, Sua confessed to him, explaining that she thought Roy would forgive her because she believed he liked her. However, Roy, feeling disappointed, made it clear that things weren't that simple. Embarrassed, Sua left, leaving Yiseo and Roy to continue their drink together. Yiseo pointed out all the areas that needed improvement in the restaurant, from the decor to the staff and the menu. As Roy got drunk, he opened up about his struggles, which made Yiseo like him even more. When Roy stood up, too drunk to keep his balance, he collapsed, and Yiseo, unsure of her feelings, kissed him passionately. The next thing Roy knew, he woke up in the hospital with no memory of the kiss. Meanwhile, Yiseo confessed to her mother that she liked a guy who was in a tough spot and holding a grudge. Her mother, worried about her daughter's well-being, urged her to stop, but Yiseo decided to leave it to chance. She flipped a coin, and when it landed heads, she chose to continue. Thrilled by the result, she ran to Roy's pub. Yiseo decided to help Roy by becoming the manager of the restaurant to help him fulfill his dream. Unexpectedly, Jiun-soo, the tycoon's illegitimate son, also came to work there. He had been abandoned by his mother and mistreated by Jiun-won. Living like an orphan, he had to fight for survival, and seeing Roy's kindness, he wanted to work for him. With only 5 people on staff, Seung-kwan thought the small restaurant didn't need a manager. But Yiseo quickly identified the restaurant's weaknesses. Customers felt uncomfortable with staff holding food by hand, the menu lacked appeal, there was no Instagram-worthy background, and the dishes weren't presented well. Roy admired Yiseo's insights and immediately made her the manager, instructing everyone to follow her lead. Meanwhile, the president noticed that a female director had been buying up shares in the corporation. Fearing she might become a major shareholder and threaten his position, the president went to meet her, hoping to find a solution. Back at the restaurant, Yiseo had a wall torn down to open up the space. She used her design skills to redecorate, and soon the restaurant became a beautiful, Instagram-friendly spot. When the restaurant reopened, Yiseo promoted it on her social media. Thanks to her popularity, Danbum Pub quickly became a hit, with long lines outside. Roy was proud of Yiseo, and their revenue soared to over 3 million won that day. The next day, the president and Sua visited Itaewon to survey the area. The president proposed that Sua marry Jiun-won, but Sua, disgusted by him, didn't respond. He then led her to Danbum, and after seeing how crowded it was, he ordered Sua to do something to sabotage the restaurant. Days passed, and despite Chef Hyun-yi being on leave, Roy stepped in to cook, and business continued smoothly. However, the next day, customers complained about hair in their food and bland dishes. Yiseo was furious and scolded the chef, suggesting firing Hyun-yi to prevent the restaurant from closing. But Roy, always kind, refused to fire her and even doubled her salary, encouraging her to work harder to justify the raise. Roy also gave a motivational speech to boost the staff's morale, reminding them that unity and effort would lead to success. Yiseo, though, was a bit sad, feeling that Roy didn't fully listen to her concerns. The next morning, Yiseo unexpectedly ran into a group of bullies. They had come with the intent to humiliate her by forcing her to strip. Fortunately, Jiun-soo showed up just in time. During a heated exchange with her classmates, she admitted that she was the one who reported them to the police, which led to them being forced to drink that day. Suddenly, Yiseo realized she had wrongly blamed Sua, so she slapped her friend. Another friend rushed forward, but was also accidentally slapped. Seeing Yiseo's anger, the rest of the group got scared and backed away. As expected, Yiseo was just as stubborn as Roy. In the following days, Yiseo frequently checked on Hyun-yi's cooking. Thanks to her feedback, Hyun-yi's skills improved significantly. Meanwhile, Roy successfully resolved internal conflicts within the team and helped the restaurant grow. At the same time, at a pub, Sua sat alone, replaying the president's words in her mind. He had asked her which side she wanted to take. Feeling torn and overwhelmed, she drank until she was completely intoxicated. On her way home, she unexpectedly ran into Roy and his group. Sensing that this was a personal matter, everyone left except Yiseo. In her drunken state, Suah confessed all her feelings. Her sparkling eyes stirred something in Roy's heart, and the atmosphere between them turned romantic. Just as they were about to kiss, Yiseo quickly stepped in, pressing her hand over Suah's mouth and pushing her away. After all, she wanted Roy's lips to remain untouched. Suah, embarrassed, immediately sobered up. But, determined to tease Yiseo, she kept insisting on going out to eat with Roy's group. Roy couldn't refuse, so he agreed, making the atmosphere tense, especially for Yiseo. During the meal, Suah explained that Jenga Group's success came from operating as a restaurant chain. She also revealed that the president himself had created their signature recipes, which played a big part in their achievements. Hearing this, Roy immediately expressed his ambition. He declared that he would turn Danbum into an even bigger franchise than Jenga Group. His determination excited everyone, and they all raised their glasses to toast the dream. Later, in the restroom, Suah and Yiseo had another intense conversation. Yiseo revealed that she had oppositional defiant disorder and boldly admitted that she had feelings for Roy. She made it clear that if anyone got in her way, she would use any means necessary to take them down. Unexpectedly, Suah wasn't intimidated. She firmly stated that if she liked Roy too, then they would fight to the end. Meanwhile, at Jenga Group's headquarters, Suah reported that Jenga Pub was thriving, drawing in massive crowds thanks to Yiseo's management. She also mentioned that Yiseo had an exceptionally high IQ of 162. When the president heard that Roy wanted to expand Danbum into a franchise, he became visibly concerned, realizing Danbum could become a serious competitor to Jenga in the future. Back at Danbum, as the restaurant continued to grow, Yiseo planned to hire more staff in preparation for expansion. Instead of taking a salary, she proposed receiving a 20% commission. However, her mother soon found out that she had dropped out of college to work at a bar and was furious. Despite her mother's anger, Yiseo stood her ground, declaring that she liked Roy and was willing to work hard for success, even if it meant failing. Unable to see eye to eye, Yiseo and her mother had a painful argument. In the end, Yiseo said goodbye, packed her bags, and left home. While wandering sadly on a bridge, Roy happened to pass by. He understood that her mother had kicked her out because she chose to work with him instead of continuing college. Feeling both grateful and sympathetic, Roy comforted Yiseo in his own innocent way, which surprisingly made her feel much better. They made a promise to each other to take Danbum to the top of the culinary world and surpass Jenga Group. They stood on the bridge, talking about their dreams and future plans until the sun rose. As Danbum continued to thrive, the need to hire new employees became urgent. However, all the candidates who showed up for interviews seemed unfit for the job. Just when things seemed hopeless, a beautiful girl arrived to apply. Roy and the employees were thrilled at the sight of her, but Yiseo immediately rejected her application, leaving everyone disappointed. At the end of the interview, a black man named Tony applied for a job. He was Polish Korean, and Yiseo found him suitable, so he hired him on the spot. Wanting Danbum Pub to grow stronger, Yiseo reached out to a television station to request an interview. To his surprise, they agreed to a recording session. When Roy heard the news, he was overjoyed and accidentally let it slip to Suah. The two went for a walk together, chatting for a long time. Ji-Yoon-won saw them and was immediately jealous. He rushed home to report everything to his father. The president already knew that Roy was more determined than most people, and his corporation feared individuals like him. To prevent Roy from becoming a threat, they devised a plan to take down Danbum. The next day, Roy went to the TV station to discuss the script for the recording, but unexpectedly ran into Ji-Yoon-won, who was also there. Using his connections, Ji-Yoon-won ensured that Danbum Pub was excluded from the recording. At that moment, Roy realized that Suah must have been the one to leak the information. Ji-Yoon-won smirked and told him that he would make sure he failed. But Roy, unfazed, shot back that he would bring Jenga Group to ruin. When the recording session was cancelled, Roy was deeply disappointed. Yiseo stayed by his side, offering encouragement and support. As the two walked down the street, they suddenly ran into Suah. However, this time, Roy coldly walked past her, leaving her heartbroken. Unexpectedly, Yiseo then told Roy the truth. Suah wasn't the one who had called the police that day. Realizing his mistake, Roy immediately ran to find Suah and apologize. After searching for a while, he spotted her at a bus stop. Without hesitation, he grabbed her hand and promised that he would take down Jenga Group soon so that she wouldn't have to suffer anymore. Just then, the bus arrived, and they parted ways. After Sua left, Roy made a call to a mysterious contact who had been monitoring Jenga Group stocks. The person reported that Roy shares were now worth over 10 billion won. Without wasting time, Roy instructed them to buy as many of Jenga's shares as possible. Upon hearing this news, the president's assistant rushed to inform him Roy had secretly purchased a significant portion of Jenga's shares. It turned out that 8 years ago, when Ji-won was involved in a scandal, Jenga's stock value plummeted. Roy had seized the opportunity, using his father's insurance money to buy shares at dirt cheap prices. Now, he had become the third largest shareholder of Jenga Group. When the chairman learned about this, he was completely stunned. He burst into laughter, almost in disbelief. He had never expected Roy to be this formidable. Without hesitation, President Jang went straight to Dandam Pub to confront him. He had always seen Roy as a weakling, but now he realized that Roy was actually a cunning strategist. 8 years ago, Roy had invested everything he had into buying shares from the company run by the man who had his father killed. Both of them were now sitting face to face, each recognizing the dangerous power of the other. However, Roy remained calm and welcoming. He even instructed the chef to prepare the best meal possible. Personally serving the food, Roy set the dishes in front of the chairman. As they ate, President Jang abruptly asked Roy why he had bought so many of Jenga's shares and what his true intentions were. Everyone at the table was shocked, realizing just how much money Roy actually had. Of course, Roy couldn't reveal his plan to take over Jenga Group, so he lied, saying he invested because he saw potential in the company. President Jang and his companions enjoyed the meal. It was so delicious that they finished it quickly. But as soon as he was done eating, the chairman brought up Roy's father. He warned Roy to back off, insisting that if he continued down this path, he would suffer a humiliating defeat. Hearing his father's name, Roy could no longer hold back his emotions. Without hesitation, he revealed his true intentions, his revenge plan. With unwavering determination, he declared that Chairman Jang and Ji-won would pay for what they had done to his father. His voice rose in anger, making the atmosphere tense and suffocating. The chairman, enraged, refused to back down. But Yiseo, who had been silently observing, now fully understood just how fearless and brilliant Roy was. At that moment, Roy made another shocking revelation. This was just the beginning of his plan to take over Jenga Group. His secret weapon was his close friend Ho Jin, the person who had been helping him from behind the scenes all these years. It turned out that Ho Jin was the same person Ji-won had bullied in the past. Back then, Roy had stood up for him, earning Ho Jin's lifelong gratitude. To repay this kindness, Ho Jin had secretly managed Roy's finances and business affairs. Since he had majored in finance, he was able to take Roy's initial investment of 100 million won and turn it into a massive fortune over the course of 10 years. A few days ago, they had met with the CEO of Jenga Company. Roy proposed a partnership to overthrow the chairman, and as a result, she was made the new president of the group. Roy's father had once been kind to her, so she saw this as an opportunity to return the favor. However, her agreement came with one condition: her share in the company had to be larger than Chairman Jang's. A few days later, they met again. Both sides shook hands and agreed to work together. The next day, the director visited Chairman Jang's house for a game of chess. While playing, she advised him not to stubbornly hand the company over to his son. Instead, he should choose a capable person to lead the group. After the director left, Secretary Kim brought some photos to Chairman Jang, proof that Roy and the director were working together. Seeing this, Chairman Jang started devising a strategy to counter them. Meanwhile, Yiseo's perception of Roy began to shift. As intelligent as she was, even she hadn't predicted that Roy would be this strategic. Curious, Ji-won asked her about Roy's grudge against his father, but she had no idea. Determined to find out, Ji-won went home and confronted his father directly. However, the chairman refused to answer and instead berated him for being useless and for working under his enemy. Feeling humiliated and enraged, Ji-won stormed out. Later, still reeling from his father's insults, Ji-won called Yiseo and asked her to meet up. He confided in her, admitting that he really liked her. However, Yiseo coldly responded that she would only consider giving him a chance if he managed to steal the company from his father. Stunned by her words, Ji-won was left speechless. As they returned, they saw Roy packing his backpack and leaving. The moment Yiseo noticed this, she dropped everything and ran after him, determined to follow him no matter what. Amused by her persistence, Roy finally gave in and allowed her to tag along. The two boarded a bus headed for the countryside. During the ride, Roy opened up about his life, describing it as nothing short of hell. A little while later, they arrived at the house of a former police officer who had investigated the accident 10 years ago. The officer admitted that he had known all along that the police chief had falsely accused Roy, but at the time, he had been powerless to do anything. He had regretted it so much that he eventually resigned and went home to be with his wife. Now, filled with guilt over the injustice Roy had suffered, the officer dropped to his knees and apologized, saying he would do anything to make amends, even if it cost him his life. However, because his daughter was still young, he hadn't dared to go against Chairman Jang. Roy, instead of blaming him, simply encouraged him to be brave and stand strong. That night, heavy rain poured outside, so Yiseo and Roy stayed at the officer's house. Out of nowhere, Yiseo stated that if the officer agreed to testify, Ji-eun would be sent to prison, and that would lead to Chairman Jang losing the shareholders' trust. This, she realized, was the key to Roy finally bringing Chairman Jang down. Looking at the scar on Roy's body, Yiseo could see just how much suffering he had endured over the years. The sight made her love him even more. Overwhelmed with emotion, she burst into tears and silently vowed to protect him for the rest of her life. But their enemies wouldn't let them enjoy a moment of peace. The next morning, the owner of their restaurant space suddenly announced that the property had been sold. Worse, the new landlord had raised the rent significantly, and their lease only had 6 months left. Everyone was worried. Roy immediately called the new owner, hoping to negotiate. To his shock, he discovered that the new landlord was none other than Chairman Jang himself. Once again, Roy realized that he was being played. Yiseo was furious when she heard about it and lashed out at Suah for negotiating with Jang. Meanwhile, Roy went to confront Chairman Jang directly. Lowering himself, he pleaded with the chairman to reconsider the lease agreement. But a ruthless man like Jang wasn't about to show mercy. He smugly told Roy that no matter where he tried to rent space in the future, he would simply buy it out, ensuring that Roy could never run a business again. Still, Roy persisted. He asked what the chairman wanted from him. Jang smirked and said that if Roy got down on his knees and apologized, he might reconsider. That was the last straw. Roy snapped, his fury boiling over. He declared that every time Jang tried to destroy him, he only grew stronger. With unwavering determination, Roy boldly declared war on Chairman Jang before walking away without looking back. Outside, he ran into Suah, who had already guessed what had happened. She immediately pleaded with Chairman Jang to reverse his decision and let Danbum keep its location. But Jang, annoyed by her interference, angrily kicked her out. As the restaurant faced its inevitable closure, the group went out for drinks. While leaving the bar, Ji-eun apologized to Roy for all the trouble his family had caused him. But Roy didn't hold it against him. He remained understanding and sympathetic toward Ji-eun. The rest of the group decided to continue the night at a club. However, when they arrived, Tony was stopped at the entrance. The security guard refused to let him in, enforcing a strict rule that banned African patrons. Tony, trying to reason with them, insisted that he was Korean, but the guards wouldn't budge. Then, to everyone's shock, Yiseo coldly stated that no one would believe a black man's words. Heartbroken and humiliated, Tony silently turned and walked away. The next morning, the bar was vandalized with graffiti accusing them of being racist. Everyone who saw the scene was speechless. Meanwhile, Ji-eun confided in Yiseo about his decision. He planned to quit his job, just as his father wanted, in hopes that it would convince him to let Danbum keep its location. Hearing this, Yiseo was deeply grateful. Soon after, Ji-eun officially resigned, believing that this would put an end to Janga Group's interference. Of course, Roy was completely against it. He refused to let anyone make sacrifices for him. However, Yiseo strongly supported Ji-eun's decision. Frustrated, Roy immediately grabbed Yiseo's manager badge and angrily told her that she was unqualified for the position because she was too emotionless. Yiseo, who had given everything to the restaurant, was furious at being scolded. She argued back, but Roy raised his voice, declaring that he would never trade emotions for personal gain. In response, Yiseo boldly stated that she had dedicated her entire life to him, so even if he fired her, she would still consider herself the manager of the restaurant. Roy was stunned by her words. Moved by the situation, Roy decided to buy a house for the team to live and work in. Seeing Roy's deep sense of gratitude, Yiseo started to rethink her approach to life, realizing that sometimes emotion and reason had to coexist. She immediately ran to apologize to Ji-Eun-soo. Seizing the moment, Ji-Eun-soo confessed his feelings for her, but Yiseo rejected him, admitting that her heart only belonged to Roy. Shortly after, Yiseo wrote an article exposing the racism they had experienced. The post quickly went viral, gaining massive support. She also made a bold declaration: if anyone dared to mess with Roy, she wouldn't hesitate to take them down. After reading her article, Tony returned. Yiseo promised to help him apply for Korean citizenship. Seeing how much she had changed, becoming more compassionate and emotionally open, made everyone happy. Roy, proud of her growth, handed her back the manager badge. Only Ji-Eun-soo stood silently beside them, feeling heartbroken. Meanwhile, Janga's secretary reported to Chairman Jang that Roy had just purchased a house in Itaewon. The news made the chairman uneasy, as Janga's stock prices had skyrocketed. Sensing an opportunity, Roy ordered all his Janga shares to be sold at a high profit before the chairman could manipulate the market. Roy then used his profits to buy a large house in Itaewon. While the team worked together to renovate their new restaurant, an elderly woman stopped by and warned Roy that the place was cursed. According to her, no previous owner had managed to succeed there. Every business that operated in the building had eventually gone bankrupt. Hearing this, everyone felt uneasy. Determined to make the restaurant a success, Yiseo started live streaming on social media to attract attention. Her efforts paid off, and the restaurant quickly gained popularity. Chairman Jang, realizing that Yiseo was the key to Roy's success, came up with a sinister plan. He invited her to a private meeting at his house and arranged for her to attend a Janga Group press conference. During the conference, as the chairman spoke about the company's vision, Yiseo boldly raised her hand and asked if there was any chance another brand could surpass Janga. Annoyed by the question, the chairman scoffed and declared that as long as he was alive, it would never happen. However, he was secretly impressed by Yiseo's confidence. As she was about to leave, the chairman's secretary pulled her aside and led her to a private room where Chairman Jang was waiting. He personally invited her to dinner at a 5-star restaurant. Aware of her exceptional intelligence, her IQ of 162, he offered her a job at Janga Group with a salary 10 times higher than what Roy could pay her. Without hesitation, Yiseo turned him down. She confidently told him that she might consider working for him one day, but only after she had built Dambum into a brand strong enough to compete with Janga. Hearing this, the chairman became even more intrigued by her. Meanwhile, Roy was staying at Ho Jin's house, dealing with the financial complications of expanding his business. Ho Jin suggested that they turn Dambum into a joint stock company. Excited by the idea, Roy gathered the team, and they officially decided on a name: Itaewon Class for the restaurant chain, and IC Joint Stock Company for the corporation. Around the same time, the former police officer who had investigated Roy's case showed up with his young daughter. Leaving his daughter alone for a moment, he stepped outside to talk to Roy. While waiting, the little girl spotted a cute cat and ran after it. Moments later, she was nowhere to be found. Everyone panicked and began searching for her. By sheer luck, the girl ran into Director Kong, who kindly lent her a phone to call her father. Soon after, the police officer and Roy arrived to pick her up. However, with his sharp instincts, the officer quickly realized that they were being followed. He spun around and caught sight of a suspicious man with a camera. Acting fast, he snatched the camera from him. Looking through the photos, they immediately understood what was happening. The man had been secretly tracking Director Kong. It was obvious that Chairman Jang was behind it. His caution and paranoia were stronger than ever. When Chairman Jang saw Yiseo's advertisement for Itaewon Class, he realized just how talented she was. Now, he wasn't just worried about Roy, he was concerned about Yiseo as well. At the same time, his secretary reported that their surveillance of Director Kong had been exposed. However, the chairman remained unfazed, telling him to ignore it. His priority now was to bring Yiseo over to Janga Group. Hearing this, Sua was completely shocked. The secretary then mentioned that the police officer who had helped Roy was the one providing him with supplies. Chairman Jang immediately ordered that he be bribed. That night, Roy met with Sua in a romantic atmosphere while she was drinking. He confessed that he liked her. However, the next morning, when he arrived at the restaurant, Yiseo bluntly told him that if he started dating Sua, she would quit. At the same time, Chairman Jang invited the former police officer to his house. He tried to tempt him into abandoning Roy by offering him a lucrative contract with Jenga. However, the officer had learned his lesson from the past. His only focus now was to be a good role model for his daughter. No matter how tempting the offer was, he refused, saying that he believed Dambam would one day surpass Jenga. Frustrated, the chairman issued a threat, implying that if the officer opposed him, he would face serious consequences. The officer, fearing for his daughter's safety, grabbed Chairman Zhang's hand tightly and warned him if anything happened to his family, he would reopen the case from 10 years ago. This visibly unsettled the chairman. Meanwhile, Ji Yun-won approached Yiseo, announcing in front of everyone that he wanted to offer her a job. Yiseo agreed to go out for drinks with him, leaving Roy at home worried. During their meeting, Ji Yun-won tried to lure Yiseo into Jenga Group by offering her a massive contract. He wanted her to be the new marketing director with a salary of 250 million won a month, 50 times what she was currently earning. Yiseo acted stunned, but in reality, she was already steps ahead of him. Pretending to admire him, she flattered Ji Yun-won, boosting his ego to the point where he let his guard down. Completely falling for her act, he ended up revealing the entire truth about the hit and run that killed Roy's father 10 years ago. What he didn't realize was that Yiseo had been recording everything. The moment Ji Yun-won realized he had been tricked, he lunged at her, trying to snatch her phone. But Yiseo was faster. Enraged, Ji Yun-won raised his hand to hit her, only to have hot coffee thrown in his face. Standing her ground, Yiseo declared that if anyone dared to harm Roy, she would destroy them. But Ji Yun-won wasn't someone who backed down easily. He chased after her, grabbed her forcefully, and slapped her across the face. Furious, he demanded she hand over her phone. Yiseo struggled, screaming for help, but despite being in a public place, no one paid attention. Ji Yun-won suddenly pulled out a wad of cash and threw it into the air. The moment people saw money falling, they rushed to grab it, ignoring what was happening to Yiseo. Just as it seemed like Ji Yun-won was about to steal the phone, Roy appeared out of nowhere. Seeing Yiseo injured, Roy was overcome with rage and immediately attacked Ji Yun-won. He was about to beat him senseless, but Yiseo stopped him just in time. If Roy had hit him, it could have played right into Ji Yun-won's trap. Moments later, the police arrived and took Ji Yun-won away. In gratitude, Yiseo hugged Roy tightly. Despite her pain, she felt an overwhelming sense of happiness. This was the first time she had felt truly protected. Then, knowing the time had come, Yiseo posted the recording online. The revelation sent shockwaves through the public, and Jenga Group's stock price plummeted. Chairman Zhang, furious beyond control, physically lashed out at his son, beating him in a fit of rage. Ji Yun-won, humiliated and defeated, could do nothing but endure the shame. Director Kong, who witnessed the entire scene, realized in that moment that she could no longer serve such an incompetent leader. Without hesitation, she went to meet Roy. Yiseo, analyzing the situation, pointed out that with the stock price crashing and shareholders in turmoil, now was the perfect opportunity to take down Chairman Zhang for good. But to deliver the final blow, they needed the former police officer to testify that Ji Yun-won had killed Roy's father. The next morning, they went to the former police officer's house, but didn't find him. He was desperately searching for his child. Director Kong found her sitting alone in a chair. It turned out that she knew her father had made a mistake in the case from 10 years ago, which caused him to leave home. Roy saw the father and daughter, and it was a very emotional moment. He had to delay asking them to testify. When he returned, Yiseo mentioned that the second condition for taking down Chairman Zhang was when he stood up to defend Ji Yun-won in an unjust way. At the same time, Chairman Zhang met with his lawyers to figure out how to handle the situation. Suah suggested that sending Ji Yun-won to prison was the only way to save the company. If Director Kong betrayed him, Chairman Zhang would be removed from his position. Although this advice made sense, she didn't expect Chairman Zhang to disagree. He firmly stated that he would rather leave the company than abandon his son. Suah quickly reported this to Director Kong and Roy, who thought everything was going smoothly. Director Kong then called an internal meeting to propose the removal of Chairman Zhang, accusing him of allowing his family's emotions to negatively impact the company, completely unaware that he had fallen into a trap. The following morning, the shareholder meeting to remove the chairman took place. During the meeting, Mr. Zhang suddenly revealed the whole truth about the case, agreeing to send his son to prison to save the company. This revelation caused the group's dismissal plan to completely fall apart. Director Kong realized she had been deceived. At the same time, the chairman's driver took Ji Yun-won to turn himself in. Seeing this, Ji-won quickly jumped out of the car and ran, heading straight for the press conference where his father was. Ji-won realized his father had sold him out for the company's presidency. The bitter son shed to tears as Mr. Jang left with a cold expression, knowing the plan had failed. Roy, feeling defeated, was called by the chairman, who sarcastically mocked him, saying, "Trying to take me down. You're too young and naive." "I underestimated an old villain like that." The chairman then demoted Mrs. Kong to a small branch employee. This failure left her disheartened, but she now pinned her hopes on Roy's fight. The next day, the trial took place. Ji-won, responsible for killing Roy's father, was sentenced to 7 years in prison. Despite this, Chairman Jang remained unfazed because, to him, the company was everything. Afterward, Roy went to his father's grave. It took him 11 years to bring those responsible for his father's death to justice. He offered his father a drink, just like they had shared the last time they were together. The wine still tasted as bitter as his heart had when he lost his father. Back at Danbum, Ji-won decided to quit his job because his brother was in prison. He wanted to go home and claim his inheritance. Yiseo had said she would give him a chance if he took over Janga. Meanwhile, Ji-won, now in prison, learned that his father had revoked all his shares, which drove him mad. He never expected his father to be so ruthless. Ji-won also returned to his father and promised to listen to whatever he said as long as he inherited Janga. He told his father he would strengthen Janga, and seeing the ambition in his son, the chairman was pleased. He immediately transferred the responsibility to Suwa, forcing her to train Ji-won to become the best in the restaurant business. The chef underwent plastic surgery to improve his appearance in preparation for cooking for a show. Tony got distracted and mistakenly added curry powder to a dish. Hyun-yi quickly noticed the mistake and screamed, but unexpectedly, this error created a delicious new flavor. As a result, Danbum's curry dish won first place, boosting the restaurant's reputation. Investors soon came forward, wanting to help expand the Danbum brand. This was a great opportunity to franchise. Yiseo realized this was a golden chance and compiled a book about Danbum's characteristics to present to potential investors. However, Roy felt it wasn't the right time. Yiseo argued that having investors now was a huge opportunity. If they expanded slowly, they would never catch up with Janga. A heated argument broke out between them. Meanwhile, Hojin also saw that Yiseo's plan was correct. On the other hand, investors were constantly calling Yiseo, urging her to act fast. If she didn't, they would invest in other restaurants, causing Yiseo a huge headache. She dragged Roy to the rooftop to complain about opening a restaurant chain. Hearing this, Roy didn't hesitate anymore. He decided to take the risk with Yiseo. Little did they know, they had fallen right into Chairman Jang's trap. They immediately went to meet a potential investor, who praised Danbum for having such a talented manager. Taking advantage of the moment, Roy firmly offered 5 billion won for the franchise. Yiseo was hesitant, but to her surprise, the investor agreed quickly. The news quickly spread, sparking interest from other investors. Within the first day, they received over 10 billion won in investment, and more than 50 people registered to open their own stores. They set up a representative office to manage both business operations and franchise training. That evening, when the group returned, they unexpectedly encountered an injured elderly woman. They rushed her to the hospital for treatment, only to find out it was Tony's grandmother. Tony showed her a photo of his missing father, who turned out to be her son. She cried, revealing that Tony's father had passed away in a car accident many years ago. Tony tearfully took his grandmother back home. The next day, the food competition entered the second round, and the restaurants were frantically preparing. Hyun-yi cooked the restaurant's signature soft tofu soup, while Janga made fermented soybeans. Ji-won tried both dishes and immediately knew Janga would lose, just as expected. Danbum continued to win the competition, and everyone in Roy's group couldn't hide their excitement. Meanwhile, Sua's group was visibly depressed. After the competition, Roy invited both groups out to eat. Sua took Roy's arm and led the way, while Yiseo, feeling upset, followed them. The group had fun drinking and decided to play a truth game. Yiseo, unfortunately, was the first to go. Ji-won asked if she would love him if Janga won. As she had promised, Yiseo reluctantly agreed. The next lucky person was Roy, and Seung-kwan asked him about his relationship with Sua. Unexpectedly, Roy admitted that he liked her. Yiseo's heart sank at his response. Ji-won suddenly asked Roy what he considered Yiseo to be. Sadly, Roy answered that she was like a younger sister. Hearing this, Yiseo couldn't hold back her tears. She had sacrificed everything for him, and now felt bitter and humiliated. Feeling embarrassed, Yiseo quickly stood up and left. Under Hyunyi's urging, Roy rushed after her. Yiseo, heartbroken and unable to hide her feelings anymore, tearfully said, "I love you. I love you more than anything in the world. I've given up everything for you these past 2 years, including dropping out of college and leaving my mother behind." She thought Roy would be moved and accept her love, but instead, she was met with harsh rejection. Both were left heartbroken and humiliated. In the end, Yiseo left, walking alone in the cold, snowy winter, the person she had promised to protect now cruelly rejecting her. She sat in the middle of the street, crying uncontrollably. Back at Jenga Company, the chairman was furious because they had lost 2 rounds in a row of the cooking competition. He ordered that, if they lost the final round, Ji-eun-soo would lose the right to inherit the company. Hearing this, Ji-eun-soo immediately demanded the opportunity to take part in the final round, confident that he would win. After the competition, Dambum grew even more popular, but Yiseo decided to take a break so that Roy could clearly understand his true feelings. Knowing Yiseo quit her job, Ji-eun-soo immediately informed his father, Chairman Jang, who recognized this as a golden opportunity. The next morning, when Roy arrived at the office, he found it empty. Everyone had left, and investors had simultaneously texted to withdraw their capital. This caused Roy's entire group to fall into crisis, having already spent over $1 billion on their recent campaign. It turned out that the other investor was a pawn, set up by Chairman Jang to trick Dambum. The 50 stores that had registered to open franchises now demanded compensation, furious at Roy for losing their money. Suwa, following the chairman's orders, brought a vase of flowers with a message congratulating Roy. Roy returned to the Golden Stream reading the letter, and it made him so angry that he shouted. He said, "You can cancel the contract if you want, but I'll have enough money to compensate everyone. However, the most important thing in business is trust, and if you trust me, please continue to support us according to the schedule." His words reassured the store owners, but the real question was where the money would come from to keep going. Roy had no idea. Suwa suggested that Roy should just run away and live happily with her, but Roy was ready to give up when Yiseo called. She encouraged him and promised to fight alongside him until the end. As expected, her words revived Roy's spirit. The next day, Yiseo returned to work. The crucial task now was to find a new investor. Looking through the list, they came across a 70-year-old real estate tycoon. Surprisingly, it turned out to be Tony's grandmother, who was actually an enemy. The godmother had helped Chairman Jang build his empire. The old lady went to Dambum with director Kong and offered her help, but Roy, stubborn as ever, refused to ask her for assistance. The grandmother was furious and scolded him for his pride, telling him that this stubbornness would lead to his failure. With that, she stormed out, and director Kong followed, disappointed in Roy. Later that evening, Roy looked at his team, who were working tirelessly day and night, and he realized that their suffering was a result of his own pride. Reflecting on this, he decided to call Tony to set up a meeting with his grandmother. Tony informed him that she had arrived on Jeju Island. Roy immediately called Yiseo, but to his surprise, the grandmother grabbed the phone from Yiseo and began talking. She continued to scold Roy, calling him an idiot. Roy had asked her to invest, but she set one condition: they had to win the final round of the best restaurant contest. Roy promised he would win, but life wasn't that simple. Ji-eun-soo also wanted to win the contest to secure his place as the heir, and he knew that Dambum had won the previous 2 rounds thanks to Chef Hyunyi. This gave him a dirty idea. Ji-eun-soo discussed with Suwa that they would announce that Chef Hyunyi was transgender the next day. As Roy and Chef Hyunyi prepared for the competition, news of Hyunyi being transgender spread across the internet. Seung-kwan quickly showed this news to the two of them, and everyone in the studio was talking about it, which deeply offended Hyunyi. She turned around and left. Ji-eun-won and Suwa were the ones who bribed the journalist to publish the article. Suwa was shocked to see that Ji-eun-soo would stop at nothing to win. Meanwhile, Hyunyi, feeling humiliated, ran to the women's restroom, but she was chased out. Roy found her in the men's restroom and spoke to her from the heart, giving her the courage to keep going. "If you give up, everyone will trample on you even more. You have to win this contest to show them your strength," he said. His words gave Hyunyi the confidence she needed. In the studio, people thought Hyunyi had given up. Ji-eun-soo demanded that the program continue without Dambum, But just as the program was about to start, Hyunyi entered the room, exuding confidence. Ji-Yoon-soo was taken aback. The competition continued, and Hyunyi lived up to everyone's expectations, creating the ultimate dish. After a tense wait, the judges declared Hyunyi the winner. The surge of happiness was indescribable. Hyunyi's spectacular return helped Dambam secure victory. Interestingly, Chairman Jang, despite knowing that his son was playing dirty, didn't reprimand him. Instead, he praised Ji-Yoon-soo, saying that his use of tricks showed ambition, a necessary trait to inherit the company. At that moment, Yiseo arrived at the company and confronted Ji-Yoon-soo, hoping he would regain some conscience. But Ji-Yoon-soo had fully embraced his dark side. He was willing to do anything to win Janga's affection. Yiseo, helpless against his evil nature, rushed back to meet Roy. It was clear to her now that only Roy could bring her happiness. Since they had won the contest, they went to meet the grandmother to sign the investment contract. This time, Roy was determined. He wanted to expand Dambam globally, not just in Korea. The news of Dambam receiving 30 billion won in investment quickly flooded the internet, which made Ji-Yoon-soo feel bitter. He asked how Sua had made Roy collapse emotionally. Now, there was only one thing Ji-Yoon-soo could do to harm Roy. His father also realized this, so he allowed Ji-Yoon-soo to attend the leadership meeting, where Chairman Jang publicly declared that Ji-Yoon-soo would be the heir to Janga. Thanks to his underhanded tactics, Ji-Yoon-soo quickly gained high praise. The news of Ji-Yoon-soo's inheritance in the newspaper made his brother, still in prison, restless. He practiced tirelessly, determined to one day return. For years passed, and Roy's icy company had grown extremely strong, with Yiseo also becoming more beautiful than ever. Roy was now the general director of dozens of smaller companies. During a meeting, the leaders presented several issues that needed resolution, but unexpectedly, Yiseo used her intelligence to quickly provide a solution, persuading the other directors to agree. After 4 years of studying abroad, Ji-Yoon-soo returned, confidently standing before the board of directors to present his plan. He proposed buying cheap land, developing it like it was in Itaewon to push up the land prices, then selling it all to turn a significant profit. The deal was expected to earn at least a few $100 billion. The chairman agreed immediately. Impressed by Ji-Yoon-soo's strategic vision, Mr. Jang then assigned Ji-Yoon-soo the task of taking down Roy's corporation and securing the inheritance. Meanwhile, Ji-Yoon-won was released from prison, but Chairman Jang's health was rapidly declining. He often felt dizzy and fainted, and doctors confirmed that he had terminal pancreatic cancer. The cold-hearted Ji-Yoon-soo only wanted his father to die so he could inherit everything. Ji-Yoon-won, after his release from prison, visited his father. For years of training had helped him maintain his composure. Ji-Yoon-soo bluntly told his father that before he passed, he should choose an heir, since Ji-Yoon-soo knew he had the upper hand over his older brother. However, Ji-Yoon-won didn't back down. He said that over the past 4 years, he had memorized all of his father's ideals and insisted that Janga must be passed down to him. Meanwhile, Roy was having dinner with Sua when Hojin urgently called, prompting Roy to rush out. When he arrived, Hojin scolded him for being foolish. He was the president of IC, yet he was dating the director of a rival company. Hojin reminded him of his father's feud with Janga. It turns out Hojin was worried because Ji-Yoon-won had been released from prison and President Jang had only a few months to live. Hearing this, Roy was shocked. He immediately picked up the phone and called President Jang, saying, "I really didn't want you to die. You have to live to compete with me." Ironically, Roy was the only one who wanted the chairman to survive, which made Chairman Jang laugh with joy. Roy returned to the company and found Yiseo asleep at her desk, exhausted. He quietly took off his jacket and draped it over her. When she woke up, she was touched, and Roy felt a sudden confusion. The next morning, there was a meeting to discuss the inheritance of Janga. If Ji-Yoon-soo were to become chairman on a stretcher, it would create chaos, so it was essential to stop this from happening. Yiseo suggested a plan. First, they must remove Ji-Yoon-soo as CEO, then put her in his place, since she also held shares. The plan was perfect, and everyone agreed immediately. After the meeting, Roy and Yiseo were left to discuss the details of the plan when Sua suddenly called Roy to invite him to dinner. Roy refused, saying he was too busy, and Yiseo, seeing this, made some jealous remarks. Unexpectedly, Roy got upset and emphasized that he didn't see her as a woman. This deeply hurt Yiseo. Seeing her sadness, Roy suddenly felt guilty but refused to admit it to her. Yiseo immediately understood. She realized this meant he was starting to have feelings for her. On the other side, Chairman Jang learned about Roy's group's plan and immediately thought of a way to deal with the deposed director Yiseo. Meanwhile, Yiseo spent every day meeting with Janga's shareholders, dedicating all her energy to persuading them to side with her. As she worked tirelessly, some of them really began to admire her. However, her efforts were taking a toll on her health. She worked so hard that her nose began to bleed. While Yiseo was pushing herself, Roy was on his way to meet Sua. She asked him if he still liked her, but just as they were talking, Yiseo walked in and saw them together. She was devastated and immediately left. Roy tried to chase after her, but Sua selfishly held him back. Only later did Roy get up to go after Yiseo, but by then, it was too late. Yiseo sadly returned home to her mother. The next day, the Janga Group shareholders meeting took place. Yiseo was sick but still pushed herself to attend, eventually fainting from exhaustion. As a result, the meeting proceeded without her, and her appointment as CEO was rejected. President Jang's side fully prevailed, but Roy didn't care. He rushed to the hospital to visit Yiseo. Seeing how passionate she was, Roy urged her to take a break, warning that if she didn't, she'd be fired. After saying this, Roy left, but Seungkwan saw him and immediately chased after him, calling Roy foolish and saying he was still blind, just like Sua had been a mistake. Those words made Roy gradually realize the truth. Seeing a necklace that Yiseo had once liked, he decided to buy it for her. However, when he returned to the hospital, he didn't have the courage to give it to her. He just stood outside. Meanwhile, Ji-Eun-won met with a society boss and threw a bag of money on the table to hire someone to harm Roy's group. Roy's side was busy taking over Yiseo's work again when he accidentally opened Yiseo's drawer and read her entire diary. Inside, he found a picture of him that Yiseo had drawn, and it finally clicked for Roy. He understood her feelings for him. At that moment, he realized he also loved her. Roy immediately rushed to the hospital, driving as fast as he could to confess his love. Yiseo, at the hospital, found the necklace Roy had given her, and she was happy to realize he had feelings for her. Just as she was feeling this happiness, a fake doctor walked in, saying it was time for her injection. When Roy arrived at the hospital, he found a mess. Someone sent him a picture of Yiseo being kidnapped, along with an anonymous message telling Roy to come alone to save her. Roy sped off like a maniac, desperate to reach her. Ji-Eun-soo, sensing something was wrong, chased after him. Moments later, Roy arrived at the rendezvous point on a road through the forest, but as he saw Ji-Eun-soo coming, Ji-Eun-won came up with a plan to take down his younger brother as well. He ordered a car to rush out and hit Roy. Seeing this, Roy rushed to save Ji-Eun-soo, but was knocked down the mountain. Just as he was about to die, he thought of Yiseo, regretting that he had not yet accepted her love. Ji-Eun-soo saw this and quickly called an ambulance. But Ji-Eun-won had already sent someone to assassinate Roy. Fortunately, Ji-Eun-soo managed to call Seungkwan and informed him in time, but they knocked Ji-Eun-soo unconscious and threw him in the same place as Yiseo. Ji-Eun-won, thinking Roy was dead, had the boss send someone to check on the body. Luckily, the emergency room arrived just in time, and they rushed Roy to the hospital in an unconscious state with extremely weak signs of life. Everyone was worried, not knowing where Yiseo was. The former police officer, seeing the camera footage, immediately figured out it was a kidnapping. However, Roy's phone still had anonymous messages, and telling the police might get Yiseo killed. Seungkwan decided to handle it himself, while Ji-Eun-won continued torturing Yiseo. He threatened her, making Ji-Eun-soo furious. Yiseo pretended to be scared and miserable, but as soon as Ji-Eun-won left, she regained her composure and untied herself. At the same time, Seungkwan confronted the boss Ji-Eun-won had hired. He begged the boss to stop, explaining that after spending 10 years in prison with Roy, they shouldn't cooperate with Ji-Eun-won. However, when they refused and beat him, Seungkwan took the opportunity to call the police and successfully brought them all to the station. Meanwhile, Yiseo worked tirelessly through the night, cutting the ropes until she could finally untie Ji-Eun-soo. Together, they joined forces to escape. Back at the hospital, Roy remained in a coma. In his dreams, he found himself on a bridge, about to cross into the other side of the world. His father appeared and said, "If you're struggling, come with me." Roy emotionally hugged his father, but he couldn't leave yet. He owed Yiseo too much. After saying this, Roy stepped back from the bridge, and suddenly, he woke up. His strong will to live pulled him back from death, but he cried for a long time. Losing his father had been too painful to describe. Meanwhile, Ji-Eun-won was also calling his father, but unlike Roy, he continuously blamed him. He said it was all his father's fault, and now he had no way back. Ji-won explained that he was seeking revenge for what his father had done to him, and he intended to harm the person responsible for the father-son separation. He casually mentioned the location where he had locked up the hostages and challenged his father to come and rescue them, promising to release them if he did. Chairman Jang nearly collapsed hearing this. It was truly a form of retribution for the way he had raised his son. After saying this, Ji-won returned to the place where he had locked Yiseo and Ji-soo. Ji-soo, who had been hiding, ambushed Ji-won and beat him up. Yiseo wanted to continue beating him to feel safe and escape, but Ji-soo stopped her. The two of them made their way outside, trying to escape in a car, but before they could get away, the gangsters blocked their path, shining headlights directly at them. The boss and Ji-won showed up and cornered the two. Roy, who had just woken up, immediately rushed to save Yiseo, but So-ah stopped him, urging him to be more careful. Roy declared that he loved Yiseo and, despite knowing the risks, was determined to rescue her, even if it meant risking his life. Roy then learned that the chairman knew where Yiseo was being held. Injured, he rushed to Chairman Jang's house. He threatened to go to the police unless the chairman revealed the hostage's location. But the old man wasn't easy to intimidate. He forced Roy to kneel, offering Yiseo's life in exchange. Roy was unwilling to kneel, but for Yiseo's sake, he gave up his pride and kneeled. The old man laughed maniacally, his ultimate wish fulfilled, but at a great cost. He sold out his son to secure Roy's submission. Roy stood up, refusing to see this man as an enemy anymore. A person who would sell out their own flesh and blood in exchange for someone's submission was beneath him. Roy snatched the address, leaving the old man seething with rage. Meanwhile, the gangsters were closing in on Yiseo and Ji-soo, preparing to kill them. Yiseo grabbed a shovel and Ji-soo picked up an iron bar. They were ready to fight, but when Yiseo finished counting to 3, she dropped the shovel and ran, leaving Ji-soo behind to hold them off. Ji-soo, who cared deeply for Yiseo, used all his strength to buy her time. But just as the boss was about to finish him off, Ji-won intervened, showing a sliver of conscience and preventing harm to his brother. The gang then hopped in their car, chasing after Yiseo. Just as she was about to be stabbed, she ran into an open field. The boss sent his two juniors to chase her while he and Ji-won went to block the road. Yiseo was struggling, but just then, Roy arrived, flooring the accelerator and ramming the enemy's car. His car was sturdier, allowing him and Yiseo to escape unharmed. Yiseo rushed to Roy and hugged him joyfully, just as Ji-won and the boss approached. Roy begged the boss to stand down, hoping their past relationship would sway him, but the boss was unmoved. Seung-kwan stepped in, deciding to stay behind and block their way. He fought fiercely, taking down the gang, but left the boss to face Roy. Ji-won jumped in the car, pursuing Roy. After running for a while, Roy, exhausted and in pain, stopped and confessed his love to Yiseo. As they hugged in the middle of the street, Ji-won accelerated his car toward them. Roy, furious, grabbed a brick and threw it, forcing the car to stop. He told Yiseo to go ahead and report to the police while he stayed behind to fight Ji-won. Ji-won, with his 4 years of prison training, was stronger than ever, and Roy, worn out from the ordeal, was easily overpowered. The boss and his juniors were defeated by Ji-won, but the man spared their lives, hoping the boss would turn over a new leaf. Roy, thinking his life was over, gathered all his remaining strength to stand again. His determination to save Yiseo gave him the power to fight back. In the end, he managed to defeat Ji-won, but collapsed from exhaustion. Just then, Yiseo returned with the police, and the two shared a joyous hug. The next morning, So-ah handed over all the evidence of Chairman Jang's crimes to the police. Jang's estate was raided, and the entire group was investigated for embezzlement and bribery. Chairman Jang, on the brink of death, was ready to take the fall for everything. However, his secretary informed him that all his restaurant partners were canceling their contracts, which would lead to his bankruptcy. Desperate, the chairman sought help, but it was too late. In that moment, he realized only Roy could save him. Ji-won was in prison, facing charges for attempted murder and a criminal record that would keep him locked up for life. Meanwhile, Roy woke up in the hospital and immediately hugged Yiseo. Yiseo's mother was furious but softened when Roy apologized, making both Yiseo and her mother happy. They left the hospital together but were greeted by President Jang at the restaurant. Roy personally prepared a meal for him, and President Jang, impressed by Roy's skill, changed his view of him. Roy then announced he'd be merging Jenga into his company, removing the Jenga name. President Jang, filled with regret, dropped to his knees and sincerely apologized, asking for forgiveness. Roy, though moved, decided to go ahead with the merger, as Jang's past actions had cost him everything. The merger meeting was held, and Roy took the position of president, with full support from the shareholders. Ji-Eun-soo, grateful for Roy's life-saving help, respected him even more and chose a new path. Roy, who had once lost everything, his father, his company, and his future, persevered with a good heart and strong will. He and Yiseo spent the day together, and Roy finally found the courage to hold her hand and kiss her passionately. They lived happily ever after. That's the end of the story. If you enjoyed it, subscribe to the channel and stay tuned for more videos. Goodbye, and see you in the next one.